Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I happen to be a very special guest, Alex Robbins. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Dan. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a great honor and pleasure.
Yeah, it's always fun to find people on Twitter and then get them on. It's like, hey, you have many good books out. Like, come and talk to me. Um,
Scrolling through the thousands of indie authors.
it's crazy sometimes
And,
because so now I like it because you were actually a retweet referral. So somebody had retweeted you, who I follow, and I was like, oh, I think it was a book blogger actually. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went and looked at your profile and I was like, yes, please. As soon as I saw your cover photo for your books. But it's hard. Like I like when people do that, and now people are starting to tag me, which I really like. They're like, hey, can you interview this author that I really like? So that if anybody out there wants to do that, please follow me on Twitter and or just DM me, like send me anybody like Alex, because it is very hard when I just go through fantasy and sci-fi, and Twitter's algorithms are not allowing me to search very well for you guys or your favorite
yeah,
authors. So it wasn't fun. So finding you and a few people, I found you and like I would say six other authors within like back to back to back. So it was very nice. And then out of the six, including yourself, four of you have come on the podcast so far. So that was like, it was a good Friday for me. So I really appreciate you coming on. So
that's awesome. Especially as because I'm not actually that active on Twitter, and also because I live in France, so there's the time zone difference as well, right? So sometimes when I
it's a
post
battle.
something, it's
Yep.
sort of like 10 o'clock at night here, and it's
Yep.
sort of 3 in the afternoon in the
Yep.
US, and then we get all these sort of changes. It's not easy, and it's not easy to force yourself to be active on Twitter as well, because sometimes when you have nothing to say, there's,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's nothing
It's
to say,
hard.
is there?
Sometimes
Yeah.
my friend, he calls it going fishing. He goes, so I'll just go and I'll just scroll to find people like yourself. And sometimes I'll text him. I said, I found three today, and like stuff like that. So yeah, the algorithm has definitely made it harder. Like I used to see things from people all the time that, like I don't think I see anything from, Michael R. Fletcher anymore. And Mike and I used to like retweet and post and, talk all the time on Twitter. So that's just like one example.
he's he's neck deep, from what I understand, because I follow him. I think he's neck deep in writing at least two separate novels at the same time, and he just
Oh,
tweeted
that's
earlier that he's now had an idea for a third that he's wondering whether he should pursue or not. So
he gave me great
very
advice when he
very
was on
busy
the
man.
podcast. So
He I've never met him in person, but he seems like a great guy. He's what I he's one of the old guard. You have these sort of I'm a very young, not physically young, but yeah,
I know that's right.
inexperienced, should we say, inexperienced indie author. And then you have people like Fletcher, Rob Hayes, Ben Galley,
Yep.
people like that have been doing this for close to 10 years now.
Yeah.
They're sort of veterans in the self-publishing industry, and they're full of interesting tales, let's say,
Yeah.
to say the least. Yeah.
I'm excited because Mike actually doesn't live that far across the border from me in Canada. So me and Dirk before on Facebook, we had talked about going like a Comic-Con or something like that across the border. So I can't remember if it's the Toronto one or what, but it's coming up this fall. So I was like, oh man, it got canceled last year. So I'm really excited to do that because I was like, I just want to like talk to people, and they know everybody. So I thought that'd be really fun to
Oh
go.
yeah.
My wife was like, oh no, when it got canceled, she was like, oh my God. Like, and then it is like a mini one, but I couldn't get across the border. Oh, I was so mad. I was so mad. But yeah,
And you're saying it's on this year. It's back on this year, then, is it? Do you think?
yeah.
You're
They
saying,
have
yeah.
quite a bit of things like the Niagara Falls Convention is back on too, which I'm excited for because I have quite a few friends who live just across the border. And they're like, oh, I want to meet up and do this and that. So I think I might actually try to just do like like just a quick event at the convention. It's this summer. It's
Sure.
like a Comic-Con thing, but I think it'd be cool, to just get some people together. Nicholas Rose, somebody who I just interviewed, who does like horror and some fantasy and sci-fi and stuff, some cool mystery things on
Yeah.
Amazon Kindle Vella, and he just lives across the border from me from Massachusetts. So we talked about he just comes up, and then we'll just drive together, and then we'll just like meet people up there and kind of have like our own little writers convention at the
Yeah.
Niagara Falls Comic Con. So I'm trying to get people together for that. So this stuff is great, but it's been so long since I talked to another author in person. It's been like
I
literally
was gonna say, yeah.
especially fantasy.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
It'd be good for us as it'd be good for us authors as well, to get some sun on our pale skin, to get out of the
So
the
true.
caves we lock ourselves in to write,
So
to
true. I'm
feel
in
the
my
sun on our
basement.
faces again.
Yeah, I'm in my basement, my dungeon, as my wife calls it. So the old writer's dungeon. But yeah, I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so much better when
just
you
our faces lit by the light of the,
get.
the computer screen, and
Yeah, yeah.
that's all. The only light we get is that. That's all we
I
get. Yeah.
forget who it was, but it was a really big indie author the other day I follow on TikTok, and it was like a nicer day for him. So he was like pretend to be like a writer vampire and coming out of the cave, and I thought that was so funny because I was like, and everybody liked it, like all these writers, because it's like that's like we all know that feeling. So I just thought it was so funny. He's like, after 500 years. Like, I was like, that was a great advertisement for writers, but yeah, it was awesome.
Gotta have that sunscreen, man. You gotta, that,
That
50,
SPF.
100 sunscreen,
Yeah,
full
yeah,
protection.
yeah.
I mean, I'm British, right? So I already have that problem. Just generally, the sun is already quite rare where I used to live, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's funny. So for that first one there, what has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty amazing, really, to be honest. I mean, I've told this story before, and hopefully I'll try and give the short version. But basically, I actually started writing because I found my English was slipping. So I moved to France about 20 years, 25 years
Oh
ago
wow.
now. Yeah, so I obviously born and brought up in England, and then came across with my parents in the mid 90s. And so obviously I was still living with my parents who spoke English every day, and have a brother and sister I speak English with too. And then when I sort of moved out, got a job, started speaking French a lot more, I found I was kind of losing my English, not necessarily conversation wise, but more sort of like my written English, right? So I used to, obviously I read completely 100% English. I watch pretty much only English and US TV. But just those sort of everyday conversations, that dialogue, I just wasn't really getting. And the English writing, I sort of found losing words, really. My vocabulary was getting squashed and taken over by sort of French vocabulary. So I thought, I just can't keep on doing this. And I've always liked writing. I've always sort of written more or less for myself. And I thought, now's the time. I have to get my English vocabulary back. I have to get my English grammar back. I have to really take control of this thing that I'm sort of losing. So I started just writing. I had several ideas I've been developing for a while. And I started just writing more or less for myself, the odd chapter here and there. And as it sort of went on, and bolstered by the pandemic, I think, as well, and all these other sort of factors that meant I was spending more and more time at home, I thought, oh, well, there's actually enough for not only a book, but actually a series of books here. And that's when I started actually seriously looking towards maybe publishing, either trad publishing or self-publishing. Got some people to read it first to make sure it wasn't complete and utter tripe, and then went through the editing process, and ended up on self-publishing for a number of reasons. I think one of the reasons was definitely that because it was my debut novel, I thought it wasn't probably good enough for trad publishing, which is maybe a bit of self-depreciation. I don't know, but I certainly thought, I wanted to get the book out there, and I didn't necessarily want to wait and go through the querying and that sort of thing. And I think the second reason I decided to go with self-pub rather than trad pub was the control I'd have over everything.
Yeah,
So the control I'd have over the cover, the control I'd have over the marketing, the editing, the release schedule. I'm in IT. I'm a computer. I'm in computer development. So there's no problem like for the website and all that sort of thing. I could do all that myself. And I thought, I'm this sounds horrible, but I'm quite averse to delegation. I quite like being able to sort of have my say on pretty much all stages of the process. And listening to a lot of trad published authors, we're talking before I started recording about people like Brian McClellan and people like Django Rixler, which I'm a big fan of as well. That people that are trad published. That was one of the disadvantages that they talked about, is that a lot of the time you when you're trad publishing, you have some say with a cover, but not that much. I mean, you can sort of say, oh, I don't like this at all, but you can't sort of say, oh, I'd rather this hand was placed like this, or that the title was done differently, or that the spine was done differently, or we have a different trim size, or or the release date. You didn't have big say with the release date either, and that sort of put me off a little bit. I thought, I wanted to have control over that sort of thing. So yes, I went for. It took me about a year and a half to write the first book in the series and roughly outline the other three, because it's going to be a quartet. Started out as a trilogy. It's now going to be a quartet. That's just how things go. Yeah, that's pretty much how it happened over the last 18 months or so.
Oh wow.
But yeah, very, very, I'm sure a lot of other people that you have on will say this to you, but it's really not, I'm really not sugarcoating it. It's a really, really interesting experience. It's really interesting to go through the different facets of putting a book together. You learn so much. I mean, you make a lot of mistakes, but you learn so much in such a short period of time. You meet so many interesting people on all sides of the equation. You meet people like you, very interesting podcasters. You meet interesting bloggers. You meet reviewers. You meet people on the technical side of things. So you meet other authors. You meet people through social media. And because writing is quite a solitary experience, it's so wonderful to be able to connect with other people that are doing the same sort of thing as you are. All these indie authors and I think that the indie authors are probably maybe slightly more tightly knitted group of people than sort of the trad authors. The trad authors that get together for conventions, that sort of thing. Indie authors, you'll see them ribbing off each other on Twitter. You'll see them, sharing each other's book links when a book's released. I thought it was amazing. When every single time an author releases a new book, like Rob Hayes has just released, it was his upcoming novel. It's always shared within minutes by the rest of the indie community. So it's all of these people that are helping each other out, and that I find really, really amazing and really gratifying and helpful as well. To carry on writing and to carry on putting out books, that you have this support, continual support.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's funny because I've had, quite a few trad published authors too come in, and, one of them had mentioned, like, I was doing, well, actually when I started this podcast, I had shared, and then so Dirk Ashton had shared, Michael R. Fletcher had shared, they go, we're in, like, we want to be interviewed. So I interviewed both of them, and it was funny how many people had said that. And then a couple of the trad published authors, they sometimes feel like they're outside the community. I'm like, well, not here. I'm like, I do a lot for indie publishers because I do know a lot of them, and like, no, but now it's at the point where, we've discovered this with a lot of, the, traditional published authors, where it's not like it used to be, like, yeah, they're, traditionally published, but it's like, you take like Scott Drakeford, like, I had him on with his,
Sure.
And it's like, he was like, oh, have me back anytime. I'm like, I'll have you back anytime you want to come and talk about whatever, just so we can get, your name out there, Rise of the Mages out there. It's like, but he was saying, he was like, they expect you to do, the same thing that indie authors are doing. You still have to build a brand, and I've heard Kevin J. Anderson talk about that a lot, where it's just not like it used to be, like, unless you're Brandon Sanderson, or one of the, those bigger names for trad publishing, like the trad published authors are just the same as us. It's just their costs are cut a bit, but then it's like, they're not meeting as, many people, and doing as many things. Like, they're not meeting the artists, they're not meeting the the book bloggers as much, and
No.
a couple of them got on that post about this podcast, like, we started, they're like, can we come to, or is this just an indie I was like, no. I was like, anybody's welcome, at any time, as long as it's like, I was teasing them, as long as it's not fiction, or nonfiction. But I'll have those people on too, from time to time. But I personally think it's just funny to see, where I totally agree with you. Like, and I, before we started recording, I've shared this story on here many a time, when I went to the Poison Pen and saw traditionally published authors, and then the indie, and like, literally, like, Brian McKellen, and I forget who the other author was, so I'm really tired today, but like, they were literally like the same thing. They were riffing on each other, and they said they go, hey, go check out every person's book here on the index. So I did. They said, come back here and tell me what you find. So I went back through the line again, and I'm like, well, all of you guys, like, literally do the blurbs of each other's books, like, oh, this is blah blah blah, this book was great, Brian McCullough, like, and they're like, that's what indie publishing is. They're like, like, we are on the same shows together, we go to the same conventions together, they're like, it's just a different community. That was like 8 years ago, and that was mind blowing. I had never same like thing like you said, it was a solitary thing. And, that's what they had said. They said, but, we really do enjoy getting together and helping each other out. They're like, it's just a different community. And, that was 8 years ago. And I've seen the indie community, really thrive and, really stick to that. And I think in terms of traditional publishing, I think you have a lot more people that think that each other are the enemy. Or that indie publishing is or something like that. There just seems to be like a different thing there. But in terms of indie publishing, for the most part, everybody I know is like just wants to help each other out. Like the amount of people that come to me, and are like, hey, as soon as your book's out, like just, can you just send me it? I can be on your newsletter. And I'm like, I haven't even begun my newsletter yet. And I have people like, begging to be on it. And I'm like, well, that's really cool. They're like, we'll share in our newsletter, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, same here. It's just, I think it's cool the people that you meet. My wife, she goes, I don't think you're actually doing the podcast to make friends. I think you're actually doing the podcast. Right. Because you're just want to make writing friends. And I was like, you caught me, and, like the other day I was talking, like I said, to Jeffrey Haskell a bit and stuff after, and she always teasing me. She's like, who are you talking to? Is it a girl? And I'm like, no. She goes, it's another author, and I think sometimes she's just like, oh my gosh. But, I enjoy talking to people on the podcast, and I enjoy talking to them after, and, hearing their ideas and things. And it's a different type of community. It's so much fun, to be a part of. And with this podcast, everybody's been so inviting and, has been so helpful. So I can definitely see why people, tend to stay, who are indie published, tend to stay indie published. It's a much different thing.
Yeah, and then I think there's also, you can also sort of go both ways. I mean, you're seeing more and more. We were talking earlier, but we're seeing more and more trad published authors, people like Brandon Sanderson, but also you're talking about Brian McLennan. And Brian McLennan, he actually, if I remember correctly, so his novels actually published through traditionally through a traditional publisher, but I believe his novellas or some of his short stories he actually self-publishes. So and then we were talking about this as well. He does the same thing. He's had stuff that's traditionally published, and so you're not necessarily. I think more and more now. I think we're going to see this more and more, especially with Sanderson's successful Kickstarter campaign, that sort of thing. I think we're going to see more and more well-known authors. If someone like Joe Abercrombie or someone like that, tomorrow said, okay, I'm going to do a Kickstarter and I'm going to self-publish, my next trilogy. He'd get millions. There'd be no problem, So I think the effect that Kickstarter has had on the traditional publishing industry as well cannot be understated. I think it also shows that you don't necessarily, you need to get established, but once you have at least a small following, you can actually, if you choose to do so, eschew the traditional publishing scene and publish your own stuff and be successful doing so. So it's opened up, I think, it's opened up room for a lot of interesting conversations around that. But to come back to what you were saying, I think you also need to decide when you're publishing how much you want to do. I mean, I've spoken to some people who have no idea, or either have no idea or have no inclination to market their own book. Marketing is really hard. Actually, selling your book is, in my opinion, is as hard as writing it. I'd say probably even harder, because writing can sometimes be annoying and can sometimes be depressing and sometimes be difficult. But most of the time, it's fun, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. Marketing, it's not that much fun. putting together ads and trying to get your book out onto social media and that sort of thing. I mean, it's time consuming. It certainly feels more like work to me. Whereas writing isn't work. Writing is fun. It's a hobby. It's interesting. But people that don't want to do that whatsoever, in my opinion, should probably think twice before going into self-publishing, because that is a big part of putting out your book. The whole marketing aspect. And the other thing is, some people don't want to. They don't want to interact on social media. They don't necessarily want to be involved in the cover making process. They just want to write. If people only have a set amount of time in the day, want to spend it writing and not doing anything else, I probably spend out the time I allot, because I have a full-time day job, but the time I allot to my indie publishing stuff, I probably spend about half of it writing, and the rest of it is putting the website, getting the website up to date, going on Twitter, looking over covers, looking over interior layout. I hang the books translated into French at the moment, so I'm having to go over them in French. Hanging all the covers redone in French. Going over stuff with the translator. Then there's books that are being edited that are coming back that you have to check. So actually, pure writing, I'd say, I'd be interested actually when you interview other indie authors, what they have to say on the sort of timeshare thing. But I'd say it's at least 50-50 for me anyway. You're spending about half your time writing and half your time doing everything else. That's why successful indie authors have assistants that do all the boring stuff, and they have to do the writing. But obviously, when you're starting out, you have to have your hand in every single pot, should we say?
No, totally. Well, that's like why, like my best friend's my tech guy, like he's in IT, and like it's easy for me, like, I've had this several times, like Scott Odin and I could not get the audio to work, and no matter what I did, restart it, so I had to call him up, and I'm like, dude, I got Scott here. I'm like, we both had to reschedule this 4 or 5 times because of life things. I'm like, I just want to get our second one done so I can put these 2 episodes out. So, he walked me through it, and I feel like somebody else, I wouldn't be able to do that, and, he does it all for free, for me, just helping me out and stuff. And it's
That's
not
nice.
time consuming for him, but, I told him, I was like, maybe one of these days if I can get a sponsor or somebody, I can actually, pay with that. But it's nice, if you can find people to help you out, it's we talk, like before recording, some people are, like, I just think it's interesting because, like you said that, because Brandon Sanderson said when he really made it big, he was like, okay, like, I think it was Kevin. He said Kevin Anderson. No, it was Kevin Anderson or Kevin J. Anderson. It was like a recent interview he did with Brian McCullen for Brian McCullen's podcast, and he had said that, like, Kevin had said that you're gonna need an assistant soon, and like, just trust me. And he goes, I don't know if we can afford that. And then 3 weeks later, Words of Radiance hit #1, and then he needed an assistant. And after like a month, everything else started to sell again. Mistborn started to sell again with these new covers and stuff, and it's like, okay, now we need like 3 assistants. So I do think it's interesting, like to hear, when people get to a certain point. But I definitely agree with you, though. It's like, it's hard to do. I've thought about that. Like, some people do, right? Just, go to an advertising company. I know like Mark Timoney goes out for a few more things, than maybe some people. Like, I do think it's hard, though, like, if you don't know what you're doing, like sometimes with the podcast, like, people, like, so I had somebody ask me this the other day. They emailed, they said, well, how many viewers do you have? I'm like, well, it depends on the podcast. I'm like, I'm really not worried about viewers. I'm like, some I get between the 3 platforms 90. I'm like, other times it's like 30 or 20. I'm like, it really just depends. I'm like, I haven't really done anything to sponsor anything. We're just 6 months in, and we're just starting to get there. I'm just worried about getting, a backlog. They say you need about 1.5 years worth of material, or a season and a half worth of material, before like people you start to go up and stuff like that, or when sponsors start coming, you just need content. So I worried about that, and I said, well, this summer I'll worry about everything else. But just with my experiences, I'd like to do a podcast talking about like social media. Like, I put up TikToks all the time. I put up this and that. It really does feel like all that work. Like, I understand when indie authors, like, it feels like you're just yelling out to the void or just throwing money down a chasm sometimes. And I do think you need to find what works for you. And Twitter, I don't think for me is the thing lately. Mark Timoney uses Instagram a lot. He's done really well. Jay Swift, I had her on twice. Like, she does TikTok a lot, and she'll even do other things and get her, she's got quite a few followers now for like her Marvel things and stuff, and like a Marvel / romance. There's these funny videos she does, they're really cool. But then she'll put her book stuff out, and she's seen an increase there. And it's just interesting for me to see what different indie authors are doing. But I definitely agree with you, though. It's like, if you don't want to do all that work, you should probably try to be traditional published. I'm impatient. I'm a patient person, but I'm impatient in terms of I want to just get them
I'm
out
so
there.
impatient.
So I do think I call it the Sanderson method, though, like what you're saying, like, because he does 60% trad publishing and then 40% indie. And I've seen him do that for about ever since he put out the first Skyward book, and I've been tracking how how that's gone. So, and actually, you mentioned the Kickstarter too, and Kickstarter just in general. When Brandon Sanderson did that, I have other indie authors that we've had on with their Kickstarters, and they said that on average, 70 to 75% of all Kickstarters went up 3.5% in day one just because of Brandon Sanderson.
That's incredible, isn't it?
So, he really brought a lot of eyes to the platform. So I actually really do hope that Joe Abercrombie, and some of these other people do it. You know what I mean? Because it really just goes to show, that we're all part of, the same kind of team, and, and things like that. And, everything's connected. So it was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many. You're not. It's not like, I don't know. I can't really think of an apt comparison right off the top of my head, but it's not like maybe some other things where there is actually stiff competition. I mean, you can't. I don't really think that being a fantasy author is a competitive line of work. I mean, there's so many readers. There are people, as some of the people I was looking at that reviewed my book, for example. These are people that are reading 300 books a year, right?
Yeah,
300 books a
totally.
year. So for a start, I don't know how they
room.
do it, but the people that do manage to do that. I mean, your book will get read. If you put a book out and you market it correctly, it will get read. People read it. There's no matter how many books are got on Amazon every day, no matter how many new people you see going into indie publishing and how many new authors are coming on the self-publishing scene, it won't take anything away from what you've done. Your audience will still be there, and especially with the places like Amazon and stuff like that, which have I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people that go on every day. You'll get a readership. So why not support other people? I mean, they're not taking it. If someone else does well, they're not taking anything away from your readership at all. So you might as well help other people out, definitely.
As somebody that buys way too many books on my Kindle that I have time to read,
I know,
or
geez,
buy
yeah,
physically.
yeah.
Like my friend the other day, I was looking for Lee Child's The Killing Floor, so I finally found a used copy.
Yeah.
After I was like, Lee Child got me in, like, to the Jack Reacher series on Amazon, got me back into fiction. So I'm thinking about going back and trying the Bourne Identity again, and things like that. But like I bought the first one, I was like, oh, I'm really enjoying it. And he goes, it's almost exactly the same as season one. I'm like, well, I'm still enjoying it. So he went and bought me like 3 used ones. He's like, is your wife gonna like let these in the house? I was like, well, I did lend you like 50. So it was cool. I'm gonna sit around and buy 45 more for you. He goes, I'll buy the rest of the series for you and we'll call it even. But yeah, like I think about that all the time, like one of the people that talk to me on Amazon, they have like 10,000 books on their Amazon Kindle right now that they have not read.
Whoa.
I'm like,
That's a lot.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
like,
it'll
you have
probably take a
people
while
like,
to get through them.
yeah. But like she goes, I see a new book cover or a new author and a blurb. She goes, shiny and like squirrel, and she goes, I'll just buy it. I'm like, wow. I'm like, I give you credit, but I do agree with you. It's such a big market. There's so many people, and a lot of people do like, if I wasn't writing so much, I'd be back to like books like yours take me 3 days. Right now I'm just writing so much, and doing so many things that trying to build platforms and stuff, and same thing you're doing, trying to advertise and find better ways. It's like I just don't have the time now, but I can do that, and there are plenty of people that don't write, they're just readers that can just do. I was reading like 60 books a year, even with being a master's program, and about 5 of that in a year. So it is a very big market. So that's a really great point.
Every indie author will tell you this, but I think that is probably the absolute worst possible thing that happens when you start actually writing a bit more, is that your to me anyway, the amount of books you read just nosedives. You just I was like you. I used to probably read more than 50 books a year, I'd say, and so far this year I think I've read 2. So
so you made me feel better. I'm about to finish one a day.
So because you only have that, we're all the same. I think most apart from the really successful indie authors, most of us have a job. So we're either writing in the morning before we go to.
Yep.
I saw a tweet by Ryan Cowell the other day who writes. So he has a day job, and he actually writes in the morning. So he gets up at 5 or 6, I think, in the morning, and he writes for a couple of hours before going to work. And a lot of people write. What's his name? Peter Brett. He writes. He used to write before he got signed as a trad publisher, but he used to write on the tube as he was going to work. And we all have these little spaces in the day, don't we? That little time. You were talking to Mary that you used to write in the evening and stuff. I write in the evening when I get back from work. So you just have that sort of 2 hour or 3 hour or more if you're lucky. I have about 2 hours a day, and we try and write for about 2 hours a day. That you can actually concentrate on writing, but that time before was time I actually spent probably reading. Totally. So you're losing that free time. Well, there's that as well. Yeah,
because it doesn't feel like you're doing it. No offense to anybody, it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. And I try to be like, oh, I'm reading totally blanking on the author right now. Oh, Richard Lee Byers. I was just looking at the Richard Baker book the other day.
Yeah.
Reading his Rebels of Anaheim. I had him on a while back. He's one of my writing heroes. He's one of the 3 authors, him, Elaine Cunningham, and R.I. Salvatore, that really made me be like,
Oh, I
I
haven't
really
read
want
that.
to read it.
I should.
Oh, it's so
Yeah.
good. I want to go later on today, get the I thought, I don't know why I had gotten them mixed up. We were at Barnes and Noble in Ohio. We were driving and I was like, oh, I'm gonna pick up this book. And I didn't buy the first one for some reason. I feel kind of stupid now, but yeah, it's been amazing. Rebels of Anaheim, I highly recommend it. But I'm reading through it and I'm like, his though, it's a little bit different because I love his style. And like he's got these these undead in it, and I love his type of fantasy horror kind of thing. And he always does that with Forgotten Realms too, like back in the day. And I want that kind of style. So that's like one I'm studying, the craft and stuff. So I can spend a little less time writing. But other books, I'm like, when they're not as similar to my writing style, I feel like I'm like cheating on my writing, and I feel like I'm not doing anything. And I'm like, I can't convince myself.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I think there are 2 schools of thought on that. I think the first, I think you're right. I think I think I don't think you're wasting time reading, definitely, because if you're reading something similar to what you're writing, it can give you a new perspective on things. I think that's really interesting. I write, the stuff I write is quite dark. So when I'm reading, again, to come back to people like Rob Hayes or even more so people like Mike Fletcher, which is dark stuff. That's certainly more towards the sort of stuff I'm doing. But then I will occasionally, I'll go and read The Expanse, or I'll go and read, something completely different. But that's good as well, because I think you need to have a break sometimes from reading things that are similar to what you're writing. And it gets you into a different headspace, which can be interesting as well, because it can open up. And in fact, you can find, I think you can find inspiration from stuff that's completely different from what you do. I find inspiration from, I read Hex the other day, which is by, I'm blanking on the name of the author, but that's a great horror story, which very sort of creepy vibe, and some good stuff in there that gave me some ideas, for some of the stuff I was writing. So yeah, I think all of that is compatible and interesting.
Well, it's like, my friend, he was like, he just suggested, the Lee Childs to me. He goes, I know you haven't read fiction in a long time. He's like, but, I like it because, I know Mark Timoney's going to kill me for this, but I know he, like, some people don't like first person, but I actually am starting to feel like I write better in first person, and it's easier for me. And so I'm trying to study, and I actually have other urban fantasies that, like, I don't think it's going to work for my zombies and Romans as much, but I have other ones like that are like Harry Dresden. Like I have a Valkyrie, a young Valkyrie. She finds out that she's, like a descendant of a Valkyrie, and there are different things and stuff. So she gets brought in by Odin and stuff to fill in for, like, he's just kind of desperate, and I don't want to give it away, but like I was like, well, that'd be a real cool, like, first person book, and I have this like monster hunter type of guy who kind of like his order is like a ranger, and it's kind of like a Van Helsing sort of thing. And I thought, well, that'd be a really cool one to do first person, like like Dresden and like Jim Butcher, So I've been really studying the Lee Childs because a lot of people really like that, and I like that everybody says those are airport books. And I'm like, well, I want to be the airport, I want to be the fantasy version of an airport book, and I want people just to go through, and I want to be able to write that many in them, just to read that many, and have the overarching series and stuff. So I've been really studying what Lee Childs has been doing, but I still feel guilty when I'm not writing like as much.
Sure. But I think you bring up an interesting point there about sort of airport books and the sort of the readability, if I can say that, of
totally,
of certain things, because I think what people don't realize is it's actually not that easy to write easy approachable prose. I think the first sort of drafts I was doing, and you can still see it in my first book, definitely, is the sort of first sort of drafts I was doing. I was going from more flowery sort of prose, and quite very descriptive, and a lot of sort of details and stuff going on, and I sort of found out that that's not really what I wanted. I wanted to go in the other direction, something that's very fast paced, that sort of flowed, and that you could get through, as we were saying earlier, that you can get through quite easily, and that you don't get you don't get too bogged down with a lot of the prose. And it's not that easy to do that. It's not that easy to sort of say, okay, I'm going to purposefully try and make something that's very easy to read and that is, descriptive, but without being too descriptive, and that we don't have pages and pages of describing what's going on, and we don't have, too complicated vocabulary unless the scene or the character inspires that. And you have to sort of go back, and then when you're editing and you go back and you say, okay, well, this is too complicated, so I'll try and make it sort of easy and stuff. And I think sometimes, as you said, airport. Brandon Sanderson, to come back to him yet again, but what are you going to do? But Brandon Sanderson, people criticize his writing style. Some people criticize his writing style because they say it is a bit sort of simple. And I think sometimes people confuse simple and easy flowing. And I think if he put his mind to it, he probably could write some quite complicated, flowery, poetic stuff, but he's made the conscious choice to go with, to go broad, to go wide, basically, to write something that everyone can read and everyone can get down with. And what the stuff I like about a lot of the stuff he does is that, even if his books are incredibly, some would say overly long, a lot of the prose, in fact, is quite easy to read, and so you actually find yourself sort of, going through the pages at quite fast speed, because you're you get easily hooked, and because the prose is so easy and flows well, and that's not an easy thing to do. So someone like Lee Child, I think, who writes from Reach, I mean, that's the same. I think the fact that it's easily approachable can be a good thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. And Brandon says that. He's like, I'm not trying to be Patrick. He's like, Patrick's
no.
He's like, I'm not trying to be Steven Erickson,
But Patrick's stuff is great as well.
Yeah. Sometimes reading after, like we're my best friend and I, we're book clubbing. We're on book I don't even know, I'm losing track, like 8 or whatever. Now in Book of the Fallen. We're on Hold on. Right before the Crippled God, and we're like trying to finish. And I told my best friend, I was like, I'm a very veteran reader, and I'm like, I would not be able. I would have stopped for when Memories of Ice or something like that if he hadn't been reading with me. Because like after I get done, I'm just like, I have a headache, and that's like 30 pages of a hardcover book, and like
it demands your attention, right?
Yeah, totally, and yeah, I agree. Like Brandon, when I was reading Warbreaker, I was on like page. I was like, I'm just gonna sit here for a minute, and then the next thing I knew, I was just like, holy crap! Like it's like an hour and a half later. I'm like on page 100. And I'm like, I have to get to bed, and then I got another 50 pages done, and I stayed up way too late. But, that to me was like, I love that book. I hope that he does a 2 and 3 really soon for it. I love that world. I love the characters.
I mean, he probably will, right?
He's so fast according to his, how many words he does. Like, I think my friend, he actually subtract, or, divide his time. And he's like, he's got to be quicker than anybody. Like,
yeah, he's annoyingly fast because he's fast, but it's good. I mean, you can you talk about word count, but it's not impossible to write. In a day, he sort of has these big writing days where he'll write 10,000 words in a day. You can write 10,000 words in a day, but the 10,000 good words is a different question altogether. For them to actually be good, I think that's what's great about him, is that he can. To me, there's no surprise that he wrote, I don't know, 4 books in a year and a half. It's just incredible writing speed. But certainly in the minority, I'd say. Certainly minority.
Like I said, though, 10,000 good words. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he's not trying to be Patrick. And that's the thing. Like absolutely. He can write 10,000 words, and I'm always curious to see how many he's getting rid of. You know what I mean? Like,
that would be interesting. Yeah,
I bet
that
would
be interesting.
More than the rest of us, and that's why he's so quicker. So, yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
I know.
But go ahead.
I just want to make sure that we actually get in and talk about your books, though.
Sure.
So, what is your series of War of the 12 about? That was a great title, by the way. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah. So the War of the 12 is actually kind of what the idea came from was about the sort of reliability of history, right? So it's this medieval inspired epic fantasy set in a sort of alternate medieval world. But what I always found interesting, and what I found interesting in a lot of other epic fantasies that when I was reading them, is how sort of immovable and set in stone history is, right? So whether it's the sort of lowly peasant toiling in the fields, or the nobles that the main character meets, or all of these things, everything that's happened in the last 400 or 500 years is taken as fact, right? There's never sort of, and you have to think about how it was at the time. I mean, how was stuff recorded? Could people read properly? Was stuff archived properly? How was information sort of shared? You know, was it sort of the nobles that shared what they knew with the with the peasants, and if so, they obviously put their own sort of spin on it, you know, and that sort of thing. So I can't always find that really interesting, that, you know, how do we know in all of these, even going back to stuff like Dragonlance, even going back to stuff like, you know, Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, how do we know actually what all these people are talking about, these written histories we have that are hundreds of years old? How do we know how much of that is true, how much is fabrication, how much has changed over time, you know? And I found that really interesting. So I thought, okay, well, I'll set out to write something which will be not necessarily focus on that, but that will be the backdrop, right? So what happens in my series is that roughly 300 years ago, before the events of the novel, humanity was pretty much on the brink of extinction. So there were these creatures that came out of the earth called graylings, which lived in these really deep pits underground, right? And sort of 300 years ago, they came out of the earth. They started attacking the human tribes that were eking out a living on this continent 300 years ago. Scattered human tribes, and the human tribes were basically slaughtered, right? Because there's no cohesion, there was no unity. The tribes, there's a lot of infighting, there was disease, all that sort of thing. And right when they were on the brink of extinction, these 12 beings appeared among them. So sort of demigod like beings, and they helped sort of unify the human tribes, bring them together, push back these graylings under the earth. And that's pretty much where history stops. So after they pushed the graylings back, they sort of then dispersed the tribes. They walked among the tribes themselves, and they founded these knightly orders called the Order of the 12. So each of the 12 founded their own knightly order, right? And then they just kind of disappeared, and that's pretty much all we know. And when the story starts 300 years later, the knightly orders have pretty much disappeared. We don't really know what's happened to them. We have no idea what happened to the 12 whatsoever. And as the first book starts, so the very first book in the series, which is called The Broken Heart of Aurelium, so it looks something like this. So this is the first book in the series. So this starts with one of the main characters in this book, who's a guy called Merad Reed. So he is guarding this place called the Pit, right? So the Pit is actually one of the places that all these graylings fled back into when they were vanquished by the 12 300 years ago. But since that's pretty much been lost to history, so no one really knows actually why they're guarding these pits. And he was sort of roped into this. He was pretty much fed up of his life up to that date. He's in his 40s when the novel starts, and he spent about 20 years of his life guarding this pit, watching this pit, without really knowing why. It's part of this old tradition. He's part of this group of soldiers called the Old Guard, and they just have this tradition that they go and conscript people from the outlying villages, bring them to this pit. There's a wall around the pit, and he's just basically been there for the last 20 years, making sure nothing happens, without really knowing why. You know, all that's been lost to history. And that's when the book starts. And as you can imagine, as you can see on the cover, that things don't really go too well. And there's one of the as the book starts, one of the knights of the 12. So one of the knights from the Order of the 12. So these are the orders that were made by the 12 before they disappeared. Arrives at the pit and says, oh my god, something bad is about to happen. And that's pretty much where things kick off. So he's the main character we follow through a lot of the first book. And the second character we follow is a woman called Julia Delaurellium. So Julia Delaurellium is heiress to the barony of Aurelium, which is where the first novel takes place. And she is pretty much reluctant to step into her role as heiress. She's been sequestrated. She's been pretty much locked away by her father, who doesn't let her out very much, and she spends her days with her nose in books and scrolls and things like that, trying to get ready for the inevitable time when she'll have to step up and take her father's place. And she doesn't especially want to do so. So what I find is quite interesting in this first book are these two reluctant heroes. So Reed obviously had no idea what was going to happen with the pit and all that's going to happen with all of that. And Julia Delaurellium is thrust into the same sort of situation. It's a situation she doesn't want to be in, and exploring how extraordinary events affect ordinary people. I always find it really interesting to write about ordinary people, right? Or at least people that don't have, I wanted to avoid the traditional tropes of having the chosen one, or of having the all-powerful being, or having all of that. I think it's really interesting. I'm in my 40s, but having an older protagonist and having people that have already been a little bit through the ringer, So they're a bit world weary, and they're not necessarily excited. When you read things about you read the Wheel of Time, or you read a lot of these great sprawling fantasies, it's often young doe-eyed protagonist who's raring to go off on an adventure. Even something like the World of Time, very slight spoilers for the first book, but the main character is forced into an adventure by events that transpire around his village, and he doesn't seem too bummed out about going off on an adventure. He seems quite he seems up for it. And I always thought, if something like that happened to me, you'd have to drag me along. I wouldn't necessarily be chomping at the bit to go off and get involved in these sort of things. But if you were thrust into this sort of situation, this sort of extraordinary situation, if you were thrust into a city that was under siege, or if you had to flee, if you were being chased by this evil that came out of the earth and that sort of thing, how would you react? What would you do?
Yeah,
I found that interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. We talked with quite a few authors who we talked about those POVs, where like not everybody that's going to read your book is going to be a 20-year-old like the main character, and it's nice that you have somebody, because you are talking about an entirely different set of circumstances that determine your character. And I feel like I personally always like Lan, because Lan's like almost 40, if he's not already 40 in book one, and he's experienced, and he has such an interesting backstory and background. He's my favorite character. So as I'm going through the books, like he just gets cooler and cooler to me, especially as I get older. I'm like, yeah, like he, his joints still work, like he can still turn anybody, but I like that though, because it is a whole different, it just gives you a whole different set of expectations and experiences to work with that isn't atypical. So that sounds really cool to me. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's sort of like the main that's something like the main story. But we definitely have, as I was saying earlier, these breadcrumbs that are sprinkled throughout the different books, that things aren't exactly as they seem. Why did the 12 disappear? Why the Greylings, the antagonists of the series, why are they sort of returning now? What are the reasons behind that? And I think that hopefully is the hook that will keep people reading from book to book, is how each novel we found out a bit more about what's going on. And eventually, I hope, so there are 3 books out at the moment. So this is the first one, which is The Broken Heart of Aurelium, and then we have the second one here. I don't have 3 hands, so I have to put one down in a minute. So this is the second one, which is The Ashen Hand of Kesrin. And then we have the third one, which is here, which is The Burning Tears of Morlach. So they all happen in different locales. And the fourth one is called The Obsidian Eyes of Cleef, and that will be out in June. So that's the end of the series in June. That'll be the last one. And originally it was going to be a trilogy when I started thinking about it. And again, coming back to prose and coming back to writing style and coming back to sort of fast-paced books that flowed well. When I sort of started separating it out into chapters, I thought, it's either going to be 3 150k books or 375k books, or I could sort of split it into 4 books and have these four novels that are all about 100k, right? And I decided to go that way in the end because I thought it lent itself well to sort of books I wanted to write. I wanted to write books that you don't have to think too much about, that you can get through fairly easily, you know, that aren't too long, as we're saying, that you can finish in a couple of sittings, and have this sort of serialized aspect. You know, all the books have an ending, but there's always the little epilogue that that hopefully will lead you into the next book in the series. And I wanted to keep that kind of like a TV series, really. You know, kind of keep that serialized thing going throughout the 4 books.
No, I think that's smart. I like how you mentioned that too, because I don't think a lot of people, have thought about that. I think people, you see a lot more duologies today. You see a lot more people
Yeah.
even doing like 5 books. And I don't think
Yeah.
necessarily. I think if you write the story and you're pacing in a certain way, or your expectations are met with each book. I definitely think that. I think everybody thinks you have to do a trilogy. Or you have to do 2 trilogies, and I definitely think that if you do it the right way. I think anybody, like, I never care. Like I saw yours. I'm like, oh, cool. There's 4. I'm like, let's do it. I've seen some duologies. I've seen some 5s. I'm like, I've seen a lot of different things. I'm like, if it's a good story, a lot of times I want them to be more. Like I want one
Yeah.
after a trilogy. So for yours, I was like, oh, that's exciting. To hear. So yeah, I think that's something that a lot more people you really need to think about and consider. Like, I know everybody does a trilogy, but do you have to? And it's nice, I think, book of 4 or 5. So
I read something the other day. I don't know if it's true. It might be complete and utter rubbish. But I read that it was actually sort of Tolkien who started this whole trilogy thing, and that because the Lord of the Rings was so successful, and the trilogy, the 3 books that form the Lord of the Rings, is that it was then that other publishers, when fantasy started to become a thing, it was then that other publishers sort of started saying, oh yeah, but okay, you're doing fantasy. Well, you need to do like Tolkien. You have to do the 3 books. And it's only since basically the late 90s, really, that people have started to branch out and do different things. Yep. And do 2 books, as you're saying, 2 books, 4 books, Malazan 10 books, and counting. And I think you're right. I think it's really interesting. I think it depends on the story you want to tell. Really, I think I think something like the Wheel of Time. I think could have maybe been slightly shorter, but that was the story I wanted to tell, so that's fine. So if it takes 13 books, whatever, that's fine, that's great. I mean, take the time you need to. Jim Butcher is I think up to 20 or 21 or in the Dresden. Like I get lost, but it's something like that. So if you have, you just don't want things to get stale, do you? It's kind of like TV or cinema or anything really. As long as you have those ideas and those stories. I mean, I knew that. Again, I think everyone is different, but I knew that when I started thinking about it, I knew the rough outline of what I wanted to write. So I knew that I wanted it to finish in such a manner. So I always have I always have a very rough plan of what I want to do. So I have my A and my B point, right? But then how I get there, I kind of go along the country road, or I can go up into the mountains, or I can go down by the river, and the actual way I get to my point B is going to be completely different. But at least I know what that ending is, and I try and not touch those last few chapters. The last few chapters of the last book, which is being edited at the moment, which will be out in June. Those last few chapters have pretty much haven't changed since I thought them up. A couple of years ago. But how we've actually got there has changed. So I think as long as people, people should have their rough beginning and ending in mind, but then obviously things can change along the way. That's normal.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. I think that's why a lot of people, get kind of, I don't know if it's scared, but they kind of, I think they're worried of changing things too much, particularly if it's, a book 4 or 5, or even a duology, and then I've had some people, like I had a novella that turned into an entire book, and then now I think it's going to make a trilogy, and I'm like, well, it's whatever. I think if you keep it organic and keep it flexible, and you never know. I think it was Stephen King that I saw a good quote. He's like, you're never actually going to know the story you're going to tell until you actually tell it. That was that made total sense. And I think if you're just let the story tell itself. And I talked to a couple people about this, and last weekend, where it's like, like I have one character in my own fantasy series where it's like, he decided he wanted to be, after draft one, he was like, nope, I don't like my life. I don't like you have to come up with an entirely new world based off of, partly this
Sure.
idea, a new social structure, history, culture. I'm like, you're an a-hole, I'm like,
Yeah.
I like you now. I'm like, you're a jerk. I'm like, just get out of here. And he's like, no, I'm central to the story. And I'm like, oh my God. So I've kind of taken a break from it. But it's funny, when, your story and those characters really, the plot even, or maybe something cool you came up with really, leads you to those things. So it is interesting though, like you said, like I have heard a lot of people say like, oh, I've had the ending in the series in mind, like Will
Yeah.
White
Yeah.
said that, for a long time with Cradle. And
Yeah.
I'm not that forward thinking, but I like that people like you are, and helpful
Yeah.
can do that. But yeah, that's really interesting. It's funny how a lot of people have said, like you just said, like kind of like a very similar thing. But yeah, I definitely think if I think a lot of people are afraid. They know where they want their series to go, but they're afraid to change the things in between. They're afraid of that journey, and I'm like, just take the journey, let it take you, and
Yeah, absolutely. That's I think that's part of the fun as well. The unknown quantity is can be quite fun as well, because as you, I know it sounds I don't know if it's arrogance or whatever, but I think you hear a lot of authors say, I feel like I know these characters like they're my friends and that sort of thing, and it's not completely false that you do when you're writing, when you have the voices of those characters in your head, as you're sort of going through, you do come to certain crossroads where you think, okay, well, I want to write it like this. As you were saying, I want to write it like this, but the character wouldn't do that, or the character doesn't think like that. So I have to go a different direction, and it can lead to some quite interesting twists that you wouldn't necessarily have thought up yourself, and you're sort of informed by the character's actions of how things are going to change. So that I found pretty interesting, definitely.
Yeah, I asked my best friend, I was like, so this jerk of a constable now wants to be a thief taker. And I was explained, like I explained what it would mean socially and in terms of, because I want people to see like the city as a character. I really like
Yeah, sure.
people do that, like Rob J. Hayes, and
Yeah.
I'm like it's just so much better. And I was like, it's gonna change all these things. And my friend's like, he always tells me the truth. He's like, that just sounds so much cooler. He goes, you never know how it's gonna make everything else cooler and all the other characters. I'm like, fine. So that's this summer I'm going draft 2, and I'm going to rewrite it like his perspective, and fix things from his experience being a thief taker. But I had to do all the research, I had to figure it out, and then I feel like the amount of things that changed, which I do think it changed for the better. It was pretty crazy. But I definitely, once I was like, at first I tried to fight it, and then I was like, no, I'm just gonna go with it. And that's like Fletcher said that the other day for their podcast. You never know when it's going to lead you down a certain path. He's like, well, usually I find that ends up being a better path for the story. So definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But that's why releasing books is long, right? Because people always think, okay, you're writing, I don't know, 100,000 words, whatever. If you manage to write, I don't know, say you manage to write 1,000 words a day just for convenience sake, that means that if you write consistently every day, that basically means that in 2 months, whatever, you've or 3 months you've written your novel, right? But of course it's not that at all, because if you write consistently 1,000 words every day, what you're going to have after your 2 months or your 3 months is your first draft. And your first draft is, I've heard other authors call it this, but my first draft is definitely a vomit draft, right? It's something you spewed out of your mouth, or
you want to read it, you're like, nah.
yeah. Oh my, what is this trash? Basically, is what you say when you start reading that. So before you even allow anyone else to see it whatsoever, I normally go through at least a couple of drafts before I let anyone else see it at all. Not even the editor, no one, not even. Yeah, I mean, even I hate reading it. I think this is trash, and it's only once you've gone through, I'd say 2 or 3 rereads, that it's something you can just about manage to read without feeling sick. And then it goes through all the editing process and all of that stuff, and then you finally get something you're more or less happy with. But I'm never 100% satisfied with stuff. I mean, I put stuff out because I want to carry on telling the story, I want to go on to other things. But if it was me, for example, now I'm like holding myself back from going back and rewriting some of the earlier stuff. I'd always want to try and change things and stuff. But obviously you can't let yourself, once it's put out, you're gonna have to leave it, move on to other things. But it's difficult.
No, yeah, I totally agree. Did you know that I'm really curious about this one now, since you mentioned, that you had that ending in mind. So right away, did you plan on writing a series then? Like you were like, oh, this is gonna be, like this is gonna be
Yeah,
the book. Like,
yeah, kind of. As I said, I definitely had that ending in mind. I didn't know how long it would take me to get to it though. So I think it was definitely going to, it was always going to be more than one book. I actually wrote the first one and about 3/4 of the second one before I even thought about publishing anything at all. So those first two books, so the Aurelium and Kestrel, were both written pretty much one after the other. And yeah, so I knew that was going to happen. And as I was sort of writing the second one, I thought, oh, this is going to be more than two books. It's going to be three, and then it ended up being four. But yeah, it's definitely always going to be planned to be several books. Yeah, yeah. But again, that's very different depending on the person. I know there are people. I mean, there are people that for a 100,000 book novel will write a 40,000 word outline.
yeah,
There are people that will literally outline every chapter, and there are people that will write their chapters with main character goes here, and then they'll put dialogue, and then they'll put then he goes on his horse and he gallops off and he kills some people and he comes back and but and it will be basically a novella length outline. And so then when they actually get around to writing it, it then becomes very. So if you structure out several books like that, you're sort of set, aren't you? And then you can write. I don't know how much Sanderson outlines actually. I think he does outline a fair bit, to be honest, which probably explains, because if you have quite a detailed outline, that is going to affect your word count as well, right? If you already know more or less where you're going, what you're going to be writing, when you actually get down to writing it, you have your outline. You said, okay, well, he gallops off. Yeah, okay, well, I'll do some little descriptive prose about him galloping away with his hair in the wind and his horse neighing and all that stuff. And if you don't have that, then you have to sort of think up all that stuff as you're writing, and so your word count obviously turns out to be a bit slower. So it's different ways of doing things. And I think to come back to your question about series, single novels, trilogies, all that stuff, I think it's the same thing. I think either you have a fairly well thought out outline of how things are going to go, so you already know how many books it's going to be, you already know what your ending is going to be, you might even know where your chapter breaks are going to be, or it's somewhere in between. And I mean, it was that I had my ending, and I didn't know how many books it would take me to get there, but I always knew it's only several books.
it's funny that you say that too. Like with Brandon, like I do know for a fact, like he does pretty decent outlines, but he also,
Yeah,
to get in the heads of his characters, he'll write like 10 pages, just full of
sure.
words, just to get into, not even that he doesn't even use, most of the stuff, but, just to
Yeah,
discover, he discovery writes his characters and in their heads. And then once he's got that down, then he goes for the outline and, adds those types of things in or flushes it out. So I definitely think that, those are great strategies. I'm trying to get better at my outlines, like from now until the summer.
yeah.
I'm trying to get definitely one done. So I'll have one rough draft done for one book. And then I'm hoping with my Romans versus Zombies to have like a really great outline. Like that's one thing I've been working on is my outline. Because I'm hoping to get better at it so it saves me time. And then, over the winter I'll be doing, re-outlining a few other books. So that way I can just kind of, get those rough drafts done. And then next 2 summers from now, try and, flush a couple of them out. But I'm not very good at outlining. I think if you are, like, kudos to you. And I'm like, I can't just sit around, and I'm trying to be more efficient, with my job
Mm.
and everything. It's like we're trying to have a baby. It's like I need to figure out how to be more efficient now so that later on, I can, get things out a lot quicker. I do think it just comes
Yeah.
down to finishing, your first book, like actually, and then learning from, like you were saying, right from the start, learning those different things from it and, ways to be more efficient.
Your free time will go down a bit when you have a kid. Word of warning.
That's fair. That's fair. Right now, I don't have a lot anyway, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of like,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
that's like people
yeah,
ask me to do
exactly.
stuff. I was like, I'll do it now. I'm like, I'm not doing it next week. Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. How do you go about your world building?
Yeah, I'm not really what you would call a history buff, but I do. I mean, that sort of medieval, the medieval epoch is something I'm interested in, without being, not on a sort of scholarship sort of level, but it's something I've always been very interesting. And what's really great where I live in I live in an area of France which is called the Loire Valley, right? So the Loire Valley is an area of Western France where there are a whole load of castles. So there's basically, I don't know, it's a ludicrous amount. It's thousands upon thousands,
Oh wow.
basically, because it was an area that was obviously there's a lot of wine and vineyards and that sort of thing going on, and it was also an area that was contended quite a lot because it was, if you've heard of Joan of Arc and all of that stuff, 100 Years' War and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of medieval history going on around where I am. So all these big sprawling castles that are within half-hour drive, and so that makes it very easy to go out and research stuff. So I went out to a lot of those castles and looked around them and had lots of ideas pop in my head about that. And there are also a lot of places around here where you can actually go and experience a lot of medieval weaponry and armor and that sort of thing firsthand. So there's a place I went to, for example, you can go and fire a loaded crossbow, and you can go and try on some plate armor and stuff like that. And all of that's really interesting. And because that medieval those, I'd say, is sort of between 14th and 16th century, that sort of period is a period I'm interested in. Because I was interested in it, I wanted it to be in the books. So that was definitely why it was set it's an alternate medieval world. And then from there, I pretty much drew up a sort of history, basically. So then I went, okay, so here, this is where the characters are now. This is 400 years ago when things started to get a bit iffy. And I went sort of through those 400 years thinking, okay, well, what sort of happened since then? So when the 12 appeared, as I said earlier, they appeared those 400 years ago, and then they left 300 years later, 100 years later, sorry. What do they sort of do through that period? Obviously, they would have, they would have founded cities, they would have opened up trade routes. They were basically there to give humanity a bit of a boost towards sort of culture and scientific evolution. So they would have done all those things. And once you start thinking about that, you can think about how they sort of did it and how it went on and things like that. And it sort of springs up organically from there onwards, really. And I'd say the only difference when you start doing stuff like that is that you have to separate historical fiction to fantasy, right? Yeah. So one example out of many examples is the guy who's on the cover of the first book. So this guy, so he's another character that Merad meets, is a guy called Aldrin. He's one of the Knights of the 12. And he wears full plate armor, so he's armored pretty much everywhere. Now, if it was historical fiction, he would basically need help getting anywhere, right? I mean, plate armor is heavy, so he'd need help getting up and off his horse. He'd need help. Some of them needed help sitting down. They need help getting upstairs. Knights of yore, basically, when you see them in films and when you see them, when you read about them, it's a far cry from reality. They would basically just sit on their horse. Basically, if you're a pikeman, right, and you could kill a knight's horse, you'd pretty much won, because the knight would fall off, it'd fall onto his back, and then you could just go and stand over him and just shove your pike, your halberd through his visor, and that'd be that. So obviously you then have to take historical accuracy and as I said, it's supposed to be action-packed, my novel. So if it has a lot of knights falling off their horses and getting stabbed to death, it wouldn't be very interesting. So then you have to take that, and then you have to take the fun side of fantasy. So this guy who's wearing heavy plate armor, he still sort of rolls and jumps around and things like that.
I always laugh when I see it in the movies when they get knocked off, then they back up, and I'm like, all right.
Yeah. And I mean, they would, the armor, it offered, I mean, plate armor offered fairly good protection, but you'd still take, if they took a crossbow bolt, for example, I mean, that would just rip right through that like it was butter. And so you have to take certain liberties, I think, when you're writing fantasy. But I definitely wanted, go back to world building, I definitely wanted my sort of love for that medieval, those 2 centuries to get them into the book.
Oh, that's cool. Have you ever thought of taking your 12 and doing like I'm trying to remember who the author was. Brandon Sanderson talked about the author in one of his podcasts. They did like a science fiction story where the gods were actually just more advanced beings with technology and things like that. It's always interesting to me, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the case, to be honest, because you know, because they imparted, they, I mean, there wasn't, I know what you're getting, I know what you're getting at, but yeah, you're thinking more like almost sort of like Star Trek levels of of
Yeah,
technological
yeah, yeah,
dissonance,
yeah.
right? So when you have when the
Aliens.
Enterprise used to arrive
Yeah, yeah.
on these planets, and they were way ahead of the of what civilization were. Yeah, that's a really interesting concept, and it is kind of like that. The 12 in my novels, that's an interesting point. That it is kind of like that, but I'd say not as far fetched as that. So they don't have knowledge of, I don't know, gunpowder or electricity or anything
Mm.
like that, but they're far enough ahead technologically wise that they would, I don't know, to give you an example, they would. They know how to make carracks, which are these big medieval, which on the front of this cover there down bottom. So the 12 know how to make catapults, and they know how
Oh,
to
okay.
make a ballista, and they know how to make they know how to make weapons of war. They know how to one of them, Brachyura, he's a sort of good at engineering. So so before he came, the human tribes used to just live in huts and wooden palisades and stuff. And he was the one that sort of got them into quarrying stone and making stone fortifications and stuff like that. So you're right, there is that technological difference that I think contributed to them being seen as gods as well. Apart from the fact that they're also bigger and stronger than normal humans. But that, yeah, that's an interesting point. That difference in technology can often be misconstrued
Yeah,
as godliness. You're right.
yeah, it's interesting. Well, that's really cool. So you talked about a little bit, but what are the most important pieces for character development in terms of your writing process?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to relatability, in my
Mm,
opinion. Anyway, I mean, I think
fair.
it's possible to write characters that you have that you don't relate to at all, but I think it's much more difficult. And that doesn't mean relatability has to be likable, right?
Yeah,
You can write characters that you can relate to, but that aren't very that aren't very nice. I mean, you
yeah,
think of the main character in Mark Ross's Prince of Thorns.
mhm,
Is not a very likable character,
yeah, yeah,
and even going up to, I don't know, stuff like Severus Snape and Harry Potter and things like that. I mean, they're not necessarily likable characters, but they are relatable characters.
yeah, yeah,
You can understand why what they're doing, and I think interesting characters are characters that are flawed a bit as well, right? So
yeah,
going back to Mered Reed and July Delaurellium, there are people that, I mean, Mered Reed, he's short-tempered, he's disillusioned, he thinks he's wasted his life, he doesn't really want to fight unless he has to. He's not very sociable, he has all of these has all of these flaws. And again, July is lacking in self-assurance, and doesn't think she's ready to take up her legacy and that sort of thing. And I think that exploring the flaws that these characters have is really important in character development. And then you can see over the course of the novels how these characters evolve. I think it's quite interesting actually because some authors say they don't read their reviews. I always think you should read your reviews you get on your work, whether they're good or bad. But some of the more critical reviews I've had have been about the Julia character, who a lot of some reviewers have said, well, she comes across as a bit naive and yeah, lacking self-assurance, and sort of like she takes second stage to a lot of what's going on in the first novel, and she doesn't make any decisions, and she gets sort of dragged around by the other characters, but she doesn't actually, as a point of view character, she doesn't actually have a lot of decision making that she's doing herself. She's almost subservient to a lot of what's going on.
mhm,
And I was kind of like, oh yeah, okay, well that's a fair criticism, but good, because that's what I wanted.
yeah,
The whole point of that character is that it's someone who starts off being very subservient, and you have to remember this is someone that hasn't been allowed out of her room all that much,
yeah,
and has had very little social gathering and stuff. And I think that's interesting as well in character development, is having someone that's in a certain position when you start writing, and then by the time you get to the end of your series, Julia is probably one of my favorite characters, but Julia is someone who goes through a massive amount of change throughout the 4 books. She's someone who starts off as I said, as someone who's completely completely being dominated by everything around her, and then goes on through the books to find her own path, and to develop, and to find a strength she has as well, to become stronger, and to become more independent and stuff like that. I find that interesting. I find a character that has nothing, that doesn't evolve at all over the course of the novels, whether it's in a
Yeah.
good way or a bad way. I find that less interesting.
No, I totally agree. Like Christopher G. Brenning's like the Hellborn King. He had just like shared a review the other day, and somebody got like 33% of the way through and was like, "Oh, these characters aren't relatable." And I'm like, "Well, because they're super flawed at the beginning, and
Sure.
if you
Yeah.
don't get through it, I'm like, you're not seeing, like you're not getting the full fruition of what happened." Like one character, like Gareth, for instance. I mean, I'm like, he's got to be one of the best written characters I've seen, in terms of character development. And I'm like, well, if you
Yeah.
didn't get through 60% of the book, like, if I'm like, of course they're not, I'm like, I don't know. But I was like, every character that he had, I'm like major character, I'm like, I've known somebody like that, or felt like that
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
some point
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so sometimes, yeah, I think people, that's the only thing I think sometimes that's bad about Marvel movies is like you take someone like Thor, right? Well, he has other things that he's working through, but he's already got his powers and situated, and really like there are other things that he's dealing with. So I think some people, think that every character's got to be like that, and even if you just take out the first movie for each of them, and then go second, third, or the Avengers, it's like in terms of character development, I don't know. I think they're kind of underdeveloped if you think of, like
I agree. Yeah.
this movie, and I think everybody thinks, oh, your character's got to have all their crap together here, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
like that's not character development. Then, like, you actually have to read through the books to actually see their character develop. And I think some people are impatient when it comes to character development, or they, but it's really like those kind of reviews or criticisms. I do find interesting, and obviously, I think
Mm.
everything's helpful, but it is interesting to see that pop up more and more because I'm starting to feel that people don't understand character development. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like you want people
Yeah.
to read about your character and her experiences and her change.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's not going to do all that in the first book. She might make some progress, or but it might only be like one time sticking up for herself, or one time be like, I want to go here, versus
Exactly.
taking charge. It's like that's not character development. I just think like we were talking the other day with some authors on here a couple times, actually 2 weekends ago, about like reader expectations and also like reader education, because I think some people,
Yeah.
like now, like knowing more about writing and craft, I have a much greater appreciation of things I read or things I'm currently reading, and I find I'm a more patient author now or reader now, now that
Yeah.
writing more and stuff, and I'm seeing what people are doing. I'm like, if that's not, like sometimes there are mistakes, but I do, like situations like yours, I just feel like, and Chris's, I just think that some people just aren't educated enough into craft, or just not patient enough to actually see the actual character development. So it's kind of interesting. It's popping up more and more, I feel like lately. But again, I think it comes from TV and movies, like where the characters basically in
Absolutely.
the first movie is done, and then
Yeah.
everything else is like it just happens after, and
Yeah.
a lot of people cover it up, and I'm like, well, that's not great writing. Like, no offense, but like, that's not great writing. Like I don't know. Like you look at like Black Panther, like I love that movie because I felt like there was a lot of like he was flawed in Civil War,
Yeah.
and like right off the bat, with his father dying, and then sorry
Yeah.
to anybody, but then in Black Panther, it's like I don't know. I thought like they did a great job with it, and I was really excited, and very sad that he passed away. I was very excited to see where that character
Yeah.
development was going to go because I felt like they really nailed his character development, and they hadn't really had Black Widow. Like she's another one. Um, I think like they do a great job, I think, with her character, going throughout because she's not just done in the first movie with, an Iron Man
No.
2. Like she has got a lot of facets and they go through those. And I think she's one of the
Mm-mm-mm.
better written characters personally from a writing standpoint, because she actually develops in every movie that she's in.
Yeah, I agree.
She's dealing with a
I
different
agree. I agree. And
Hawkeye.
I think I was going to say what's interesting as well, to talk about character development. I always find it more jarring when a character isn't consistent
I agree.
actual development. So if you're reading something and someone who's been acting a certain way suddenly decides not to, just off the in the spur of the moment, I always find that harder to swallow than someone
It pulls
who
me out of the book.
yeah. So I mean, someone like July who's having difficulty finding her feet in the first novel, I would find it very jarring if suddenly she decided to take control, or if suddenly she decided to I don't know, lead the counterattack or decide how to defend the city or something like that. You'd say, what? Well, she's been locked away for half her life. Why is she now starting, giving orders to people? And so you have to be consistent. And if she then did that in the third book or the fourth book, I'd find that more believable because she's been through more as the story develops. So I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. I think back to Utrecht of Edinburgh. I love the last.
Oh yeah.
I love it because even though he develops, if he's gonna mess with somebody that he loves or cares about or respects, like he's gonna do the right thing no matter how bad it's gonna be for himself, especially himself, but everybody else. And season 5, I'm like on episode 6. I'm just like, oh my god.
Oh man, you're gonna have to you're gonna have to get through those last 2 episodes. Yeah, that's great.
Trying, that's so difficult, and I'm like, because you feel so much for him, and I've been trying to watch the show before reading the Pale Horseman and going through the rest of the books. Those are on the summer, but like I love season 3 and 4 because like even though as he develops, and he changes, like he's still like there are certain things that he's not going to change, and I love those things. Like in season 5, it's not spoilers because it's in the preview, when they go after her, his daughter, like he's going to stop at nothing, and anybody that gets in his way, he's going to either tell you off or kill you to get to his daughter and save her. And I'm like, like that, like I come back to that character and that the show, and like his men too, like he'll do anything to protect them, and look out, and I just those are things that I love about his character. And if they did change those key things, and if those key things were not consistent, I would not be watching the show over.
It'd be weird, right? Yeah.
It'd be weird.
That is just TV done right. That, I mean,
I agree.
To me, the Last Kingdom is just, it's kind of weird because you have stuff like, Wheel of Time, which went in a completely opposite direction, in my opinion, into like production values and stuff like that. And I just think that something like The Last Kingdom, which obviously has a smaller budget than something like Wheel of Time, but the decors and the sets and the production design on that show is just amazing. Everything looks lived in. There are loads of sweeping vistas and wide shots, and it's incredible. All the actors are great. I really, it's a really great production. It has been since the very first first series, really, but it's just been that consistent quality throughout the series. It really inspiring to see something like that. Great series.
No, I agree, and it really makes me. That's like the Jack Reacher series. I was like, I was like, well, like Tom Cruise ruined it for me, and I didn't go read it. And the more I heard about the series, I was like, okay, I will give him a shot. Well, the show, like I thought it was brilliant. Like, and I'm like reading The Killing Floor, just after having finished the show last week, and after I'm going through, it was like like a week later, and you can literally see the shot for shot in your head. And I'm like,
great respect for the source material.
Exactly. And you could just tell, like, that's even one part where he just takes somebody's sunglasses that he just beat up, in the previews. Look, and there's just so many little things that you can tell, like, it was made with love, and I feel like that's like The Last Kingdom, and
absolutely.
It just comes off screen, and the writing's just so much better, and obviously they have amazing actors and especially actresses, in my opinion.
I agree, 100%.
Great writing, but it's given me, those 2 shows have given me a greater need for for more shows like that, with the writing being the key aspect, and that's a bar up, I think, for for everything else after that. So, and the Wheel of Time to me was not meeting that bar personally. So.
No, it was fine, but it's certainly lacking that, I'd say, that little spark, that little extra little bit of believability that would have pushed over the top to have been something great.
And I think it was like 20 minutes into the first episode of Reacher, I was like, I'm here for this entire show.
So they've got it. They've got it right. When he breaks his zip ties and he comes out of the cell, I was like, they've got it right.
Oh my god, you nailed it right there. I'm like waiting for that part in the book, because then like once they get out of that part, I'm just like waiting for that part in particular. But that's the one where I was like, I think that was right around that part. It was either right before or right after he did something or said something. I was like, Okay, and I like that guy as an actor too. I think Alan does a
Yeah.
great job, in a lot of things, but it's good to actually see him get, like the main spot. I feel like he's always like, the second person or something like that, like a follow-up
Mm-mm.
character or something. But yeah, it's been excellent. So again, I talked about, before we started recording, I love your covers. Did
Yeah, thanks.
I'm just curious, did you plan on, like, did you just do the first one and then try to be consistent, or did you kind of, like pre-plan that you were going to have them, kind of match in terms of cover design and, the letter,
Yeah,
stuff like that?
yeah. I think I didn't really. I think it's it's quite hazy. But from what I remember, I knew that. So the titles of the book. So we've got Kesrin, Aurelium, and Morlac. I pretty much knew starting out that each book would be in a different locale, right? So from there, I knew that on the cover of each book, I didn't when you as you know when well, or you'll find out when you start to do your covers, is that when you work with a cover artist or a cover agency. I worked with an agency called Demonza. Thought they were really good. And what you basically do is you pretty much give a rough description, so a page or half page description of what you would like your cover to be, and they go away and they'll produce several different drafts. Different companies work in different ways, but the Monzo, they give you two different drafts from two different artists, right? So you'll get two different, quite I'd say fairly different covers from two different artists, and then you pick one of those two, and then you iterate on that cover until you get to. I think it took for this cover, it took, I think, maybe 6 or 7 probably different versions before I actually got to something I was happy with. So yeah, so that was that. And so what I basically said was is I wanted, the guy standing in front of the siege castle with the Greylings coming in or whatever. So you give your basic idea, and then once you've done that, then you get the cover back. And then yeah, once I got that first cover, I knew that then for the next books in this series, I wanted to keep that consistency. So I knew that the next book was going to be Kesrin. I was going to be, Kesrin in the background with then Jalaya, who's the character we talked about earlier, who's standing in front of the of Kesrin, and then the third book, which is set in Morlac, which is a guy called Jeffson standing in front of Morlac, the fortress of Morlac, and the fourth book will be the same. Sorry.
I love his red sash. I just think it really.
Yeah, his red sash is pretty cool, right? Yeah,
it's really cool. They just look really great.
Yeah, the red. So things have significance. What's quite funny is there are lots of Easter eggs in the covers, or lots of little things that people will probably never pick up on, that will never see the light of day. And I might talk about one time or put on my website or something. But everything in the covers has been thought about, and everything has significance. So yeah.
Well, that's really neat. I like that. I love when you can do stuff like that and put in the Easter eggs and stuff like that. And I love finding stuff like that personally, like especially like as a career or something. Or I always like looking at book covers like over and over again and stuff. So for me, like having little treasure hunts like that is really fun. So I like that. So for our last one, do you have any news, updates, promos, current projects, or anything like that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, we've already talked about it, but the last book in the series, so book 4, is going to be out in June. So I'm hoping sort of mid-June at the latest. So that's coming up. God, it's already April, isn't it? So that's coming up quite soon, in a couple of months. Yeah, so that'll be done. And then the other thing that's on at the moment, which your listeners might find and your watchers might find interesting, is that there's a big giveaway going on at the moment with indie authors. I believe it's I had it up here, but of course it's gone. But I think it's Reign of Reeds, or
Okay.
I'll send you the link if you want, and you can put it into.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
and it's what it basically is it's a big fantasy giveaway where 66 authors, so I'm one
Oh,
of them. So even if you don't like my stuff, there are 65 others. And we're doing this big giveaway. So basically, all you have to do is go and sign up, and you get 65 books free to download. So there's obviously my short story called Pridora, which is set before the events of the first book, and there are 65 other books by a whole host of authors. So it's Reign of Reeds that are doing that.
okay.
And when you do that, you're also entered into a prize draw. So they've got some stuff. I've pulled up the webpage here. So they've got stuff like they've got t-shirts, board games, chess sets, all of that stuff that you're entered into when you download this stuff. So that I thought was really great. It's a great way for all of these authors to get a bit more exposure we were talking about earlier. And it's free. So if that's something that sounds good, it's through April 15th, it looks like, or 14th.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, that could be something that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'll definitely be sharing that out on social media. I'll actually pop the link in here at the bottom too. So that sounds awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely have to, think of having you back, in June, like whenever you're ready, just let me know, and we'll be more than ready to to help you with the book release, stuff like that. So
thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. I love talking. As we were saying earlier, I love talking to people about the thing about living in France, is that a lot of people speak French. So having conversations in English is great as well. Speaking to people in English is great for me too. I speak French all day, and it's always great being able to talk to other people about what I do. Love it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, Alex, I really want to thank you for coming on today. I mean, I definitely learned a lot. I was really excited, again, once I saw, your first book cover, and, I read the blurb and stuff like that. So I obviously, our audience knows we'll have all your links in the description. So for anywhere you're finding this podcast, you guys can go and find Alex's links, find his books. I think once you guys, go and see the covers and check out the blurbs as well. If you need anything more than what Alex has said about his books today, I don't know if this is the podcast for you, but as soon as I saw him I saw that first blurb, I was like, yep, added that right to Amazon. You're one of my first little group there. I just got my Kindle actually for Christmas, so you're
Oh.
So I was like, oh yeah, bam. It was like shortly after that. I think it was a few weeks ago. So I was pretty excited there. So I'm definitely excited to start book one. We'll be reviewing book one here shortly. It's on my list for reviewing books for the summer. People keep asking me about that. So once that's up, I'll definitely let you know. But yeah, I really want to thank you for coming on. I'm really excited to get through to to book one, and I'll definitely be asking you questions and things like that once I get done with it. So I'm really
Please do.
I love the behind the scenes things, like asking stuff. So I'll be really annoying at that point, but I was like learning.
One thing authors really like are talking about their books, so don't worry.
Yeah. I think it'd be okay if I hit you up and was like, hey, why'd you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend, my friend. Like I said, you let me know whenever you're ready. We'll get you on again, in June. And I wish you good luck with everything. And if there's anything else,
thank you.
Anytime, you just let me know. So.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having me on, and good luck with your own. Right, I'm looking forward to reading it. Please send me something when you have something ready.
For sure. Yeah, anybody that's been on the podcast, I'm gonna send out a mini newsletter, and
that'd be great.
Just just be like, hey, if you guys want, here's this, and
like
that.
Sure.
So, yeah, I'd love any feedback or anything you have to say. So yeah, that'd be really exciting. So I'm really excited to send that.
Absolutely, it'd be a pleasure. Yeah.
Excellent. You have a great rest of the day, my friend. I will be emailing you.
Enjoy your weekend, Dan.
Yeah, you too. I will talk to you later. You guys have a good rest of the day, okay? Bye, Alex.
Bye.